You're in the 1950s. Television is still a luxury that few have, radio rules in homes, and the science of nutrition is just beginning to take its first steps to understand what makes us gain weight and why some people suffer heart attacks without warning. In that environment, some preliminary studies started to correlate high blood cholesterol levels with serious heart problems. That conclusion quickly raised alarms. Cholesterol is public enemy number one, newspaper headlines screamed. And at that time, a villain was needed. Cholesterol was pointed out as the great invisible threat that ran through our arteries. Putting heart health in check, society needed something to blame. Why did so many people die of heart attacks without ever knowing they were in danger? Thus, the legend of an apparently simple enemy was born. Cholesterol is bad. Remove it from your diet, said doctors, magazines, and public health campaigns. Over the years, this idea took hold deeply. It was very easy to turn cholesterol into a perfect villain. It appears in the blood test, you take a sample, you get a high number, and there you have it. There's the culprit. It is linked with fattening foods, fatty meats, eggs, dairy products, all suspected of raising that feared marker. It sounds medical and technical. The word cholesterol had the force of a definitive diagnosis, a result to fear. Many families in America, for example, grew up hearing stories like, "Don't eat so many eggs because it will raise your cholesterol. Red meat clogs your arteries." Thus, little by little, the notion remained in the collective imagination that anything that raised cholesterol was dangerous. And this is where the story becomes more dramatic. Official nutritional guidelines were published recommending a drastic reduction in the intake of saturated fats and cholesterol. Food companies responded by flooding the market with low-fat, cholesterol-free, light products. People, convinced they were doing the right thing, replaced fats with refined carbohydrates, white bread, sugary cereals, etc. This massive change in habits had a paradoxical effect. Cases of obesity and type 2 diabetes increased. And even though today we know that not all cholesterol is the enemy, that global campaign was so effective that if you ask your grandparents, uncles, or even to several people you know, many keep saying, "Watch out for cholesterol. It's bad." Now, pay special attention to this piece of information. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, cardiovascular diseases cause around 17.9 million deaths each year worldwide, accounting for 31% of all deaths. Surprisingly, it's estimated that nearly half of these affected individuals had cholesterol levels considered normal before experiencing the cardiovascular event, which shows that normal does not always equal optimal. The difference between normal and optimal may seem irrelevant, but imagine you live in 2050. All humans are obese and live until 45 because most die from heart attacks or heart diseases. It would be normal to die at that age and be sick. It does not seem so. It is for this reason that even if your lab tests come out normal, apparently, it does not mean that they are good or optimal. And today we are going to talk about this, the origin of the myth and its cultural roots. Why was cholesterol so easily demonized? Part of the answer lies in that our brain loves simple explanations. If something is wrong with your heart, there must be a responsible factor. And if cholesterol rises, there is the factor. Moreover, laboratory findings showed fatty deposits in the arterial walls of people with heart diseases. Connecting a couple of dots, it was assumed that cholesterol equals harmful fat. However, this view did not take into account the complexity of metabolism, nor the role cholesterol plays in the production of hormones, the formation of cell membranes, or the creation of vitamin D. We only saw the surface of a much more intricate picture. In the midst of this scenario, some researchers emerged who began to question the hypothesis that all cholesterol is bad. However, they encountered an environment where the reduction of fats and cholesterol had already become a medical dogma. This led to several decades of confusion, where nutritional guidelines continued to focus on cutting fats, without distinguishing between different types of lipids, or the importance of a complete lifestyle, exercise, stress, genetics, and so on. Time passes. Pharmacies full of drugs designed to lower cholesterol in general become common. Millions of people change their diet, avoiding eggs or consuming low-fat versions of all kinds of foods. sometimes substituting with large amounts of sugar or other unhealthy ingredients. The outcome is a scenario where obesity and metabolic syndrome grow, while cholesterol consumption supposedly reduces. Doesn't it seem paradoxical to you? Cardiovascular disease, which is supposed to be the root of all this dilemma, should have decreased if dietary cholesterol were indeed the main enemy. This is how we have reached the current era, where it is finally being acknowledged that the matter is much more complex than the old health magazines promised. Up to this point, you might wonder, so, is cholesterol good or bad? The answer, as you will discover in the next chapter, is not reduced to a simple yes or no. Rather, it's important to understand the nuances and the enormous relevance of factors like inflammation, genetics, and the specific types of cholesterol and their particles. Stay alert, because you're about to debunk one of the great myths of modern health. In the next chapter, a complete redefinition of what we call good cholesterol and bad cholesterol awaits you. It's not what you think, I assure you. Believe me, it may surprise you. Do you remember those mornings when your parents or grandparents would tell you with a worried tone, "Don't eat so many egg yolks, they'll raise your cholesterol"? For decades, this warning echoed in homes around the world, because it was believed that all the cholesterol we consumed went directly to clog our arteries. However, what we often overlook is that the cholesterol that comes from the diet, exogenous, is not exactly the same as the cholesterol the body produces naturally, endogenous. And this distinction can be key to understanding why we don't all react the same way to the same food. Why does this confusion exist? To illustrate it, imagine that in your body there are two sources of cholesterol. The internal factory, your liver, which is a highly specialized organ, continuously regulates the production of cholesterol. Everything you eat, from eggs and meats to seafood, contains some amount of cholesterol, although it varies greatly depending on the food. It was previously thought that by eating cholesterol, it would directly enter the bloodstream, linearly raising your levels. But in reality, your body doesn't function like a funnel without a filter. The intestine is prepared to absorb part of the cholesterol and excrete the rest. And your liver reads the signals of how much is entering to regulate internal production. When you eat more cholesterol, the liver usually makes less. And if you ingest less, the liver increases its production to maintain a balance. Selective absorption. The small intestine has mechanisms to decide how much cholesterol to retain and how much to discard through bile and feces. Variable impact depending on the person. Some people are genetically superabsorbent and experience more marked increases in their blood cholesterol levels after eating eggs or animal products. Others, however, see hardly any changes. Controversial reputation. Historically, dietary cholesterol was demonized. However, current evidence suggests that for most of the population, moderate intake of foods with cholesterol is not as direct a risk factor as once thought. As long as a healthy lifestyle, low and ultra-processed foods is maintained, with enough exercise and inflammation control, endogenous cholesterol, the one your body produces. It is estimated that between 70 and 80% of circulating cholesterol comes from the body's internal production. Your liver acts like a control panel that receives signals from various hormones and nutrients, adjusting the amount of cholesterol it produces. Endogenous cholesterol participates in the synthesis of hormones, in the structure of cell membranes, and even in the formation of vitamin D. Demonizing cholesterol without understanding this crucial role can lead to inadequate interventions. The balance we did not know. Have you ever noticed that there are people who can eat several eggs a day without their tests showing a drastic increase in blood cholesterol? Or, on the other hand, there are those who, even if they watch their diet, have high levels. This is not a whim of fate, but the result of a delicate balance between what you consume, your genetics, your metabolic state, insulin, inflammation, and liver regulation. La moraleja. Avoiding dietary cholesterol radically does not always result in a better lipid profile. In some cases, natural fats are replaced by products high in sugars or refined carbohydrates, which can trigger inflammation and triglycerides, worsening the situation. The true focus of cardiovascular prevention lies in understanding that endogenous production and exogenous intake, they're two sides of the same coin, and it is necessary to maintain control over the entire metabolism. not just focus on an isolated number. Chapter 2. Redefining good and bad cholesterol. Now that we already know this fundamental distinction between the cholesterol you consume and the one your own body generates, we can dive into the complexity of lipoproteins. Imagine that each of these lipoproteins is like a vehicle carrying fat and cholesterol along your blood. But not all vehicles are the same size, nor do they carry the same goods, nor are they equally well maintained. Cholesterol is a passenger that cannot travel alone through the blood because it is a hydrophobic molecule. It does not get along with water, so it needs specialized trucks or delivery people to transport it through the bloodstream. These trucks are molecules known as lipoproteins that our body produces. These lipoproteins are composed of compounds that resemble their name, lipids and proteins. The lipids that do not get along well with water are inside them, and the proteins that do get along well with water are outside, surrounded by it. These lipoproteins are responsible for transporting cholesterol through the blood, and we all know that blood is mostly water. The trucks that deliver cholesterol to the houses. Think of each cell in your body, the house, needing cholesterol to build and repair membranes, produce hormones, and perform other vital functions. Cholesterol is truly important for our body, which is why we produce it ourselves. But it has a problem. Since it cannot dissolve in the blood, it gets on these trucks called lipoproteins. There are two main types of lipoproteins, and each one is extremely important in the pathophysiology of cardiovascular disease. Pay close attention. A polypoprotein B includes low-density lipoprotein, very low-density lipoprotein, low-density lipoprotein precursors, and intermediate-density lipoprotein, and even the remains of chylomicrons. These lipoproteins share the apolipoprotein B, which allows them to carry large amounts of triglycerides and cholesterol trucks with APOA. Mainly the HDL, which carries apolipoprotein A. This truck is associated with collecting excess cholesterol and transporting it back to the liver. To summarize these scientific terms, over the decades, the medical community discovered that LDL cholesterol and HDL cholesterol do not travel in the same trucks. And as you will see in a moment, it is these different types of trucks that truly cause problems, not the cholesterol itself. HDL cholesterol, high density. Why is it called high density? Because the APOA lipoprotein, in which it is transported, has a higher ratio of protein versus cholesterol, which actually means it carries less cholesterol in this molecule. It is associated with protective effects for the heart, as it helps collect excess cholesterol from the tissues and carries it back to the liver. That is why they labeled it as good. LDL cholesterol, low density. Why is it called low density? Because the APOB lipoprotein, in which it is transported, has a lower ratio of protein versus cholesterol, which actually causes this molecule to have more cholesterol transported. It was thought that, being the particle that carries most of the cholesterol in the blood and is frequently found in arterial plaques, it was the main villain. Hence, the label of bad was born. But what if I tell you that LDL is not necessarily bad by definition, but its effect depends on factors like the number of particles, size, and the degree of inflammation, oxidation. But above all, its harmful effect is due to the type of truck that transports it and not the cholesterol itself. The reality is more complex than what a simple total cholesterol test can show. Cholesterol is not bad in itself. It is an essential nutrient. What complicates everything is when trucks with APOB get stuck at the entrance of some cells or, even worse, in the inner wall of the arteries. Endothelium. Endothelium as the goalpost. The endothelium is like the doorway to each house. Cell or tissue, when the endothelium is healthy, usually in our childhood and early years of life, it is capable of controlling who enters and who exits properly. However, as the years go by, it becomes damaged and inflamed by our bad habits, becoming a rusty goalpost. This allows certain lipoproteins to stick to its innards, and the APOB trucks are the ones that get stuck the most, while the APOA trucks usually do not get stuck. What is absolutely important for you to understand at this moment is that actually any APOB particle can become very problematic if it penetrates the arterial wall and undergoes oxidation. Not only LDL, but also VLDL, very low-density cholesterol, and IDL, intermediate density cholesterol, travel in ApoB. Although LDL has been the focus of attention, there are particles from the ApoB family that are even more charged and potentially dangerous. For example, low-density lipoprotein, very rich in triglycerides, which is then refined to low-density lipoprotein. Look at this surprising fact. In a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, about 50% of patients hospitalized for an acute coronary event had low-density lipoprotein within normal ranges, 130 milligrams. This data debunks the idea that it's enough to have LDL in order to be safe and highlights the importance of evaluating more advanced indicators like ApoB. For a more precise view of the risk, why don't ApoA stay so easily? While ApoB tends to get stuck in the arterial wall when something goes wrong, inflammation, excess particles, endothelial injuries, lipoproteins with ApoA, that is, the HDL has another mission and different behavior. They collect excess cholesterol. Imagine they are cleaning or recycling trucks. They circulate through the body, absorb unused or excess cholesterol, and take it back to the liver for processing or elimination. Smaller sizes and different function. Their molecular design makes it less likely for them to get trapped, and their main role is not to deposit cholesterol, but to remove it from tissues. It is even believed that ApoA cleans arteries that have ApoB stuck in their endothelium and improves endothelial health by doing so. When an ApoB truck gets stuck, it invites more. Here comes the drama. If an ApoB particle, let's say LDL or VLDL, manages to pass through the endothelium and get stuck, damage to the arterial wall may occur. That damage starts attracting more particles and immune system cells. Oxidation of the particle. The trapped lipoproteins oxidize, becoming very attractive decoys for immune cells. The macrophages arrive. These are defense cells that, upon detecting oxidized particles, begin to devour them, forming foam cells. Inflammation cascade. The immune response creates an inflammatory microenvironment within the arterial wall. This can attract more ApoB particles and more defense cells, worsening the injury. Over time, this repetitive process of accumulation, oxidation, and immune response forms the atheroma plaque, restricting circulation and increasing the risk of cardiovascular problems, angina, heart attacks, etc. Where does the good HDL fit into all this? As we saw, HDL with ApoA. It usually doesn't get clogged or cause that inflammatory cascade. On the contrary, it helps remove excess cholesterol from the cells and forming plaques. However, high HDL is not automatically a guarantee of protection if your lifestyle or genetics promote having many ApoB particles prone to oxidation. The final lesson of this chapter: beyond simple labels. When you hear good cholesterol or bad cholesterol, remember that there are actually multiple types of trucks traveling in your blood. And what makes the difference is who carries ApoB, greater potential risk. What condition are the roads in, your arteries and their level of inflammation? How many trucks get stuck and call for more reinforcements, triggering the immune response? Hence the importance of knowing not only your LDL level, but also your total ApoB, the presence of VLDL and IDL, and your overall state of inflammation. It's not the same to have a couple of trucks circulating in an orderly manner as to have an entire convoy crashing and calling a crew of macrophages to the disaster area. Why does understanding this impact your longevity? Cardiovascular disease remains the leading cause of death in much of the world. Breaking the myth of high cholesterol as an absolute evil is vital to understanding that your real risk depends on multiple factors, including the number and type of LDL particles, ApoB systemic inflammation grade, insulin resistance status, genetics. Some people have familial hypercholesterolemia, lifestyle habits, diet, exercise, stress management, sleep. When we combine all these elements, we get a more accurate picture of your cardiovascular risk and can focus interventions on what really matters. All of the above makes it clear that it's not enough to just look at total cholesterol in a blood test, not even settle with traditional LDL-C. There are more specific tests, such as directly measuring the number of LDL particles, LDLP, or the concentration of ApoB, which give you a much more accurate view of how loaded your arteries are. Let's then observe the following curious fact. If you understood this chapter well, you should now know that a person with slightly high LDL, but with an athletic lifestyle, low inflammation, good HDL levels, low triglycerides, and a moderate ApoB particle count might not be at significant risk. Another person with normal LDL, but with high inflammation, elevated triglycerides, and especially high ApoB could be at high risk despite showing good numbers in a basic lipid panel. And what can you do with this information to improve your health and prolong your life? Demand a more in-depth lipid profile. If possible, besides the normal lipid profile that your doctor always orders, request tests that measure ApoB, since doctors never send them through normal protocol. Besides the high-sensitivity C-reactive protein, to get an idea of your inflammation levels. Evaluate your lifestyle habits. Exercise, sleep quality, and stress management are not luxuries. They are pillars that determine your cardiovascular and metabolic health. Think of cholesterol as part of a whole. The liver, the arteries, your cells, genetics, and what you eat together orchestrate a very complex symphony. Focusing only on one number can lead you to incorrect conclusions. Now that you have seen that dietary cholesterol and endogenous cholesterol are not equivalent, and that LDL, HDL are not simply divided into bad and good, you may be wondering, what else am I missing to fully understand my cardiovascular health and my longevity? Well then, in the next chapter we will delve into how genetics, your daily routine, and your metabolic balance, especially the relationship with insulin, can turn cholesterol into a mere bystander in your body, or into a first-line antagonist. There you will discover why two people with the same level of LDL can have completely different risks, and how to make decisions that favor your long-term health. Chapter 3. Genetics, Lifestyle, and Metabolic Health. Has it happened to you that you know someone with high cholesterol who nevertheless leads a fairly healthy life? Perhaps they exercise regularly. They do not overindulge in junk food, and yet their tests show values that alarm the doctor. On the other hand, there is that person who eats everything, seems careless, but maintains cholesterol within acceptable ranges. How can this apparent contradiction be explained? Welcome to the world of genetics and metabolic health, where nothing is as simple as eating more or less fats. 1. The genetic factor. When heredity rules. To begin with, it is important to understand that not everyone is born with the same genetic instruction manual. Some gene variants can directly influence how your body produces, transports, and eliminates cholesterol. Example of predisposition: familial hypercholesterolemia. People with this condition usually have very high levels of LDL from an early age due to a mutation that affects the LDL receptors in the liver. This means their body does not clear LDL from the blood as efficiently as most. Other polymorphisms. There are genes that regulate the ability to absorb dietary cholesterol, the amount of triglycerides you produce, and even the production of lipoproteins rich in ApoB. The key here is that if your family has a history of high cholesterol or early heart disease, it's not enough to just say, stop eating fats. Yes, diet is important, but sometimes the issue lies within the internal machinery that doesn't work like in most people. A real-life example. Imagine Jose and Maria. Jose has a genetic mutation that makes him produce more LDL particles than he needs. Even eating healthy, his levels remain high. Maria, on the other hand, does not have that genetic problem, but her diet and lifestyle are so disorderly that in the end, she also ends up with high LDL levels, although for different reasons. The result? Both have an elevated cardiovascular risk, but the strategy to help them will not be exactly the same. With Jose, his ApoB particles will need to be monitored more closely. Perhaps adjust his diet more precisely and consider specific interventions. Maria, on the other hand, might drastically improve with just a comprehensive change in habits. 2. The role of metabolic health. Much more than just cholesterol. But genetics is not everything. The way we live can turn certain genes on or off, worsen or improve the condition. This is where metabolic health and insulin resistance come into play. When the body does not respond well to insulin, blood glucose levels and triglycerides rise, facilitating the production of VLDL, another lipoprotein with ApoB. At the same time, low-grade chronic inflammation increases, softening the endothelium and making it more susceptible to the adhesion of particles. Systemic inflammation. Do you eat a lot of ultra-processed foods? Do you suffer from chronic stress? Do you not get enough sleep? All these factors foster an inflammatory state that turns your arteries into fertile ground for ApoB particles to get stuck. Exercise and body composition. It is not just body weight in kilograms, but where the fat accumulates. Excess visceral fat around the organs alters insulin sensitivity and raises inflammation. Meanwhile, regular physical activity improves your body's ability to manage fats and sugars. The myth of eating less fat or eating less cholesterol. For years, the idea that the only important step to lower cholesterol is to reduce the intake of saturated fats or dietary cholesterol has been hammered in. However, this ignores the rest of the metabolic equation. You can eat few eggs, but if your diet is full of sugars and refined carbohydrates, you will trigger spikes in triglycerides, greater accumulation of visceral fat, and more inflammation. There are individuals who can tolerate more fats in their diet without significantly raising their dangerous lipoproteins, as long as they maintain an overall balance, quality proteins, unrefined carbohydrates, sufficient micronutrients, and an active lifestyle. 3. The virtuous or vicious circle of metabolic health. The good news is that you are not a prisoner of your genes, at least not 100%. Your metabolic health can improve or worsen your genetic predisposition. Imagine it as a great regulator that can soften inherited tendencies or intensify them. If you promote a balanced internal environment, good diet, exercise, stress control, good sleep, you will achieve less inflamed arteries, a lower number of ApoB particles, and an endothelium more resistant to adhesion. If you perpetuate bad habits, your unfavorable genes will be exacerbated. Furthermore, even if you do not have a strong genetic predisposition, the accumulation of negative factors can still generate high risks of cardiovascular disease for you. But stay with me, because I'm about to mention a mortal enemy that we almost never measure. And if your genes are not on your side, you may already be aware of it. Calcification in your arteries. Chapter 4. The calcium index as an indicator of cardiovascular risk. Have you ever heard of the calcium index or calcium score and wondered why more and more people are getting it to know their cardiovascular risk? Imagine having a special X-ray of the future of your heart, a preview of how much they have hardened. Oh no, your arteries. That is, in simple terms, the power of the coronary calcium study, CAC for its acronym in English. 1. What is the calcium score and why does it matter? The calcium score involves a computed tomography of the coronary arteries that detects and quantifies the presence of calcium in the arterial wall. Over time, arterial plaques tend to calcify. Therefore, finding calcium in the coronary arteries is associated with a higher risk of developing cardiac events like heart attacks. The higher this index, the more calcified plaque is usually present. How is it done? Generally, it is a non-invasive and quick scan. It does not require contrast media or painful procedures, measuring the amount and density of calcium, expressed as a score. The range goes from 0, absence of detectable calcium, to very high values, above 400 or 1000, which indicate a high probability of significant coronary disease. Numerous studies, like the multi-ethnic study of atherosclerosis, MESA, have shown that this index is a strong predictor of cardiovascular events, even more precise than traditional LDL values in many cases. Although a score of 0 is usually associated with low risk, it does not mean total immunity. Since there may be soft plaques not detected by the test and various factors like inflammation, high blood pressure, and dyslipidemia can facilitate the formation of new plaques over time. The calcium score ranges from 0 to more than 400, with notable increases in the risk of coronary complications as the score grows. For example, those who exceed 100 points experience up to 10% chance of a cardiac event in 10 years, while above 400, the risk can exceed 20% in the same period. It is worth noting that not a few people with high calcium scores show normal cholesterol or glucose parameters, thus discovering a hidden threat to your arteries. Consequently, the calcium score is essential for uncovering problems that could go unnoticed in traditional exams, even if your doctor says you don't meet the criteria for it. However, it is better integrated within a complete cardiovascular evaluation, along with advanced markers ApoB, highly sensitive PCR, insulin resistance measurements among others, and an assessment of lifestyle. A low calcium score does not exempt from maintaining a healthy diet, exercise, and the control of chronic inflammation, while a high level demands closer monitoring and often interventions to limit the progression of the plaque. 2. Why does a normal calcium score not always mean you're in the safe zone? One of the great myths around this study is believing that a low or zero calcium score means everything is perfect. Without a doubt, a calcium score of 0 is often associated with a lower short and medium-term risk, but it does not capture soft plaques. Coronary calcium registers plaques that have already calcified, but it does not always detect soft, non-calcified plaques, which can be unstable and rupture, causing a heart attack. Risk factors remain latent. Even if the calcium index is low, if there are high levels of inflammation, insulin resistance, or elevated ApoB particles, the actual risk could be concealed. Time and progression. A low score today does not guarantee it will remain that way in a few years. If no action is taken, plaques can form and calcify later. In other words, a normal result can be good news, but it does not grant a blank check to neglect diet, exercise, or inflammation. The body is a dynamic system, and the absence of calcium today does not rule out the formation of dangerous plaques tomorrow. 3. How does the calcium score fit into your exams? The calcium score is often confused with an absolute substitute for other lipid markers or imaging tests. While it is very useful, it does not replace the detailed analysis of ApoB and LDLP. Knowing how many potentially atherogenic particles, APO trucks, are traveling through your arteries is key to predicting future plaque formation. Inflammatory markers. Ultra-sensitive C-reactive protein. Chronic inflammation can precipitate the appearance of unstable plaques. Assessment of metabolic health includes measurements such as fasting insulin, HbA1c, or HOMAIR, since insulin resistance can accelerate arterial disease. Other imaging studies. In cases of doubt or in high-risk populations, a coronary angiopoiesis, which if using contrast, can detect soft plaques that the calcium score does not reveal. 4. Who should get the calcium score? While each case is particular, we should all take a calcium test at least once in our lives after the age of 20 to identify early on if something is not normal with our cardiovascular risk. 5. Taking actions to improve or maintain a good score. Suppose your calcium index came out low, even 0, and you want it to stay that way, or your score was high and you need to reverse the trend. Work on inflammation. Maintain a lifestyle that reduces chronic stress. Improve sleep. Limit ultra-processed foods and excess sugars. Structured exercise, strength training, and aerobic activities help control blood pressure and improve insulin sensitivity. 2 pillars to protect your arteries. Constant vigilance. A score of 0 today could increase in a few years if you abandon good habits. Repeat the test periodically. Under medical recommendation, it can be useful to evaluate the progression or stabilization of the disease. Specific treatments. In high-risk cases, a health professional might recommend dietary changes, pharmacological treatments, or more rigorous interventions to slow the progression of calcification. Final reflection on the calcium index. The calcium score is not the magic wand that will solve all the unknowns of your cardiovascular health, but it does provide a map of how your arteries are doing in terms of calcification. Along with advanced lipid tests, inflammatory markers, and a global evaluation of metabolic health, it becomes another tool to fine-tune risk prediction and make personalized decisions. Do you like these longer educational documentaries more than our usual videos? Let me know in the comments section. I want to invite you to visit our health coach at tuvisalud.com. If you want to learn more about this topic, our coach is ready to help you. Don't forget to share this video with your family and friends. This helps us continue creating content like this. See you in the next one. A hug.